Back in late 2014, around October or November, I was 18 years old. I was very much enjoying my new freedom from the confines of childhood. At the time, I'd just gotten my driver's license and drove a 1998 Chevy sports van. I did pretty much everything in this van. It was pretty much a hangout spot on wheels, and I started making a lot of new friends. One night, when I went to go see some of these newfound friends, something happened that I still cannot explain. It was late at night when I decided to drive some odd 25 miles to go see my friends. Between my town and theirs were only dark, quiet country roads. Every once in a while, you'd pass a driveway maybe with a street light on the property, but that was about it. Ever since I was a kid, there had always been one road around the county that people liked to whisper about. They called it the Swamp Road. The road was located just past the local high school in the county closest to my town. This school was in the middle of nowhere, and it was a very eerie sight at night. The road itself was extremely dark and completely silent, located right in the middle of a large patch of woods. This made it even more terrifying. Of course, this was the path I had to take. As I pulled onto that road, I somehow managed to keep my cool. It was a commonly used shortcut to the area where I was going, so I had no issue driving down it at the time. The road had several hills along it as well, then came to an opening out of the woods, then banked right, then left again before hitting more hills and finally a stop sign. As I was hitting the very last hill right before the opening, at the edge of the woods, my eyes suddenly locked onto a bright white sheet on the side of the road. It was so distractingly bright in the darkness that I almost managed to hit a pothole. I ended up passing that white sheet by and continuing forward, but I started to think about things as I drove on. I've always been one to think about bags at the side of the road. What if it's money, or someone threw out a dog they didn't want, or something worse? My curiosity got the better of me, and once I hit that stop sign at the end, I decided to briefly turn back and see what that was. Right after the first turn, there was a small field entryway that I parked at. I decided to turn off the headlights and shut off the van as well. I'm not sure why I did that. I guess it was teen angst of not being afraid. The walk back to the edge of the woods was a bit longer. The only reason I didn't want to park closer was because a car could potentially come over the hill, get freaked out and wreck because of the van being parked there. I parked a little ways back and walked toward the edge of the woods. The moon was pretty bright out, so it wasn't that scary. Once I got a bit closer to the woods though, I noticed some of the trees were not quite dead yet, and covered up most of the light, making it nearly impossible to see. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight to see that the sheet was completely gone now. Nothing was there. My heart sank at first. Maybe it wasn't at this hill though. Maybe the next hill up or something. As I was about to start walking once more, I began to hear a rustling sound out in the woods. I didn't even have time to think. I didn't know if the sound was going away or coming right at me. All I remember is I heard something running fast in those woods, and it sounded like whatever it was dragging something along the ground. I ran back to my van, started it up, and immediately shot out of there. During the drive to my friend's home, I tried to tell myself that whatever I'd just witnessed was completely understandable and rational. Perhaps it had just been a sheet full of trash or something, and an animal had come and drug it away, got spooked when they heard me walking towards them in the woods and ran. I got to the park that I usually pick my friends up at and waited for them to arrive. I got out of the van for a moment to throw something away near the restrooms when I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the rear of my van and the side, there were bloody handprints all over it. No joke, I was looking at bloody dripping handprints on the back windows of my van. I was the only one there. I don't know if maybe someone was trying to prank me back at Swamp Road, but if they did, it really got me good. I was driving well over the speed limit the rest of the time because I was so scared. To this day, it's still the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. When I was about 14 or 15, we moved to a new town hundreds of miles from our old one near Los Angeles. The new town was older, much smaller community as well, very old-fashioned style of people leaving the garage doors open at night because no one worried about security. My family, though, coming from a town where we knew better, never left any of our doors open. One weekend, my parents went out of town, leaving me home alone. They went back to our old city to visit my aunt and uncle. I didn't really care though. I just wanted to have the home to myself and be able to do whatever I wanted. I had a couple of friends over. We ordered some pizza and watched rented movies together. Around 10 or 11, everyone else went home. I was now home alone in this huge old 5-bedroom house. My bedroom and our family room were upstairs, so when my friends left, I just stayed upstairs with the TV on and started to fall asleep on the sofa. At around 1 a.m. though, I was suddenly woken up. I can't remember if I heard something or felt something, but I know that I woke up in a complete panic. I could hear noises coming from downstairs. I realized I was in the dark, with only the light from the TV to guide me. Our family room light had turned off for some reason, and I didn't remember ever turning it off. I jumped up and started turning lights on from upstairs. I could hear footsteps in the dark downstairs and hear someone walking across the tile flooring. My dad kept a shotgun for just in case upstairs in the spare bedroom. I knew how to use guns for my entire life, and he trusted me with it too. Back in the day, that wasn't so bad. I grabbed the shotgun. It was only a single shot loaded, so I put 3 more shells in my pocket. I walked very slowly downstairs. The stairway had very little light, as the light switch downstairs lit the bottom half only. I made my way over to the front room lamp, then to the kitchen light. I went down the hallway to the bottom floor bedroom, turning on every light I saw and checking every room. I didn't hear anything or see anything out of the ordinary now. I made special precaution to check my parents' bedroom and bathroom. I figured that if there was someone there, the burglar would surely be in there going for cash or jewelry. I didn't see any windows or doors open. I started to think that maybe I was just making myself hyped up over nothing. I made my way back to the stairway and the front room. The front room had a living room that my mom always called the sitting room. We were not allowed to hang out there usually, but it's where guests would sit down while waiting to enter the main home. You know, kind of a fancy room. Anyway, that room had the front door and the stairs leading to the side door to the garage. When I checked our front door, I saw it was locked. Then I turned to the garage door, only to see that door was unlocked. We kept that door leading from our house to the garage locked at all times. Something inside me dreaded to open it, but I figured I had to check the garage too now. When I opened the door from the house to the garage, I nearly crapped my pants. The garage door was open. This was impossible. My parents had left much earlier that day, and I knew for a fact that door had been closed after they left. I would have noticed if it was open at any point. While I was cleaning my room when my friends came over, I had taken all my laundry out to the garage. When I said goodbye to my friends, I walked out with them, and for sure I would have seen my garage door open at that point. I turned on all the lights in there as well. The garage was empty, just the big door rolled up. I hit the button to close it and locked the door from the garage to the house. I went back upstairs and pretty much stayed awake all night with the loaded gun next to me. Nothing happened during the night, thankfully. The next day, I put the shotgun back unloaded. I went outside to see if someone had maybe forced the door open or something. No tool marks or anything. I looked throughout the garage and noticed someone seemed to have opened my dad's toolbox. I couldn't tell if anything was missing though. It did in fact look like someone had been rooting around. I decided against telling my parents what happened when they came home. Only if my dad noticed something missing was I going to do so. Mostly because I knew how they were, and I didn't want them to blame me for leaving the door open when I'd clearly done nothing wrong. I also didn't want them to never leave me home alone again. I wonder if what shook me awake was the noise of the garage door opening, but I was too sleepy to realize it in the moment. To start, I suppose I should give you some context. This happened sometime in October. I was at my dad's apartment complex. I need to explain the building layout before I go on. It had 3 floors and 2 entrances, one in the front near the parking lot, and another right by some trees that divided the property and another house nearby. That back entrance was where I usually smoked at night. I didn't want my dad giving me shit for smoking weed in the apartment. I was smoking out of a shitty homemade bong made out of a 1-liter Pepsi bottle. I had just finished a bowl actually, and was packing another one. I had just taken my next hit, and blew out a huge cloud of smoke. All of a sudden, I could see in my peripherals that something was moving around in those trees. I thought it might be a deer at first. I was a little bit sketched out though, because the area of Canada I live in is known for having some real bad drug addicts and other crazy-ass people. I pushed the feeling aside initially and simply took another hit. This time I knew for sure I saw something though. I could see someone sneaking on the little path in the woods. I immediately took one final hit when I saw a man wearing what looked like blue coveralls, wearing a clown mask. Normally, I'd get the fuck back inside and go back to my apartment. I was so high in that moment though, I called out to the man, "Hey man, you want a hit?" The man looked over to me. I couldn't see his eyes because of the mask, but I could tell he was glaring daggers at me. The man went to reach behind his back as I fumbled for my keys. I stuck them into the lock and shakily unlocked the door as the man began to charge at me. He was holding what looked to be a gut hook knife. I got in before he arrived and threw the door shut. The man managed to sneak his arm inside though and hold the door open. At that moment, I knew I was fucked. I yelled out for help as loud as I could. I didn't know what to do for a moment. Then I remembered some martial arts from my 10th grade classes. I threw a kick at his arm as hard as I could, and I ended up breaking it. The man dropped the knife, of course, and yelled out, "Oh, you motherfucker!" He ran full force at the door. I gave him the middle finger and slammed it in his face. I ran back to my apartment and called the cops right away. A few Mounties rushed in, and I gave them my statement. We were told they were looking for a man fitting his description. He had slashed 2 random people with the same knife he dropped, and one of them was in critical condition. They caught the man in the end when he tried to go to the hospital for his broken arm. His fingerprints were on the knife, and he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. I still do smoke weed out there, but now I always carry a knife with me, and I always keep my guard up. So this is a story about what my mother experienced in our house when she was little. We live in the same old farmhouse she grew up in. When my mom was about 13 to 16 years old, my grandpa used to have to leave for a few days on business trips, as he was a big dealer in grain bins. My grandpa and grandma had divorced and no longer lived together. My mom would be left alone at the house because of this, and the neighbors would keep watch over her. Now, this wasn't such a big deal because where my mom is from and where my family lives, it was a very small town in South Dakota. Pretty much everyone trusted each other. On multiple separate occasions, my grandpa would leave for a day or two, and my mom would be left all alone. Most of the time, she would invite her friends over to keep her company and enjoy the freedom of having no guardians around. After a while, though, friends were simply invited over so she wouldn't have to be alone, and here's why. Late at night, my mom and her friends would be chatting in her room or sleeping, when all of a sudden, they'd hear the cellar doors of the basement open from the outside and someone walking down the stairs. The cellar was only accessible by those doors outside and from a single door in the kitchen. Once they heard that sound, they all froze in fear. My mom said usually after that would happen, someone would take a stick and walk around raking all of the pipes and vents to make an echoing sound throughout the house and let my mom and her friends know the person was there. They lived in the upstairs portion, which is where all the rooms are located. Directly in the middle of the upstairs was a hallway leading down to the dining room/living room, and at the bottom of those stairs was the patio door. Back when my mom was little, there used to be a really creaky screen door and main door that led to that room. Next to that door on both sides were two large windows that showed out onto the front lawn and patio. My mom said that person would then walk to the screen door and repeatedly open and close it, slowly, over and over. They would walk around the home, scraping all the windows with a stick, sometimes even walking around the whole house multiple times. If they weren't scraping those windows, they were pacing back and forth on the patio. It was a pitch-dark house and property, a mile out of town. Just to put into perspective how terrifying this was for her, this person was clearly trying to mess with her. This was in the early 80s, so there was only one phone in the home, downstairs, in the living room, which just so happened to be directly above the cellar and basement. My mom and her friends had to run downstairs in the night while someone was wandering around the house and just outside. They'd call a family friend named Kevin. Every time they did, when Kevin arrived, the man would be gone. This went on for about 4 months or so, and only ever happened when my grandpa was away from the home. My mom believes it was the neighbor from down the road. We lived just outside of town, so our neighbor's neighbor was about 1/4 of a mile away. My mom said that he and his wife were batshit crazy. They didn't like anyone petting their horses, which my mom didn't know when she'd done so before. She was chased by the wife with a shotgun after. Goes to show just how crazy they were. My mom thinks he walked all the way up just to torment her for coming around their horses that one time, and of course, just because they were crazy as well. We all have no way of knowing, but it's still insane nonetheless. The story used to really terrify me as a kid, especially since we still live in that same house. I was 15, living in the Mojave Desert in Southern California during the 90s. Lots of wide open space and not many people around. One weekend, my dad and I take out our dirt bikes via trailer to the outskirts of a very small town called Barstow. It was midsummer, so not a lot of people were out riding, which typically was a common sight. The heat must have had something to do with it. After unloading our bikes, we decided to trek for a few hours, keeping track of landmarks and marking trails with red cloth under rocks to find our way back easily. After some time of riding and refueling brakes, we crested a hill, only to see a dilapidated cabin. There were many lone buildings in the Mojave, but rarely anything like this. This felt out of place right off the bat. Being the intelligent people we were, we decided to check this abandoned abode out. We opened the front door. The doorknob was barely hanging on. It seemed to be a single room, no bigger than a studio apartment. It was very obvious, though, that people had been staying there. There were candy wrappers, beer cans, lots of things with recent dates as well. A lone bucket outside reeked of heat-cooked human droppings. There was no furniture, but there was a single wall-mounted bench and a fireplace. The ceiling had lots of people carving names, messages, typical hearts with a date and 2 people's names. I decided to take a rest on the bench for a moment. As I sat down, I tucked my feet under the bench and put my toes on their tips on the floor. The instant I did this, I felt the floor begin to give way. In surprise, I looked down at the floor, which didn't seem to be attached to the rest of the wooden floor. I removed this cutout piece, about a 2-foot square. I called for my dad. He looked down through the hole with the flashlight from his bike. It went down about 7 feet and back far enough for neither of us to be able to see the end. This is when my dad showed his parental instinct. He looked over to me. "Well, I'm too fat to check this out. You gonna go see what's down there?" I took this as a challenge and climbed down by myself. There was a hallway carved out of the desert bedrock that went back about 15 feet. I walked along cautiously until it opened up into a large circular room. The room was empty. but it was very big. I continued to walk around until I stubbed my toe on something. I looked down, only to see a metal rod embedded into the bedrock with thick chains welded on. I looked over to the walls. The walls were full of scratch marks from fingernails, tons of them. The more I looked, the more I could see that there were bits of fingernail embedded in those scratches in the rock. My eyes began to water and my heart started to race. I was legit freaking out now. I spider-monkeyed right out of the entrance and told my dad everything while trying to hold back my tears. He looked very worried. We hopped on our bikes and tailed it into high gear. Following those red rags we left as landmarks was the most stressful time I can remember in my life. We got back to the truck, loaded up, and booked it home. My dad hid the truck in the garage for a few days after, just to be sure no one recognized it and followed us. Never went back, and don't intend to either. We reported this to the police, but we never heard anything about it after. It was a Sunday early in the morning. I live in the suburbs, but my parents own a farm that I enjoy going to because I get to see my dog when I'm there. Her name is Molly, and she's a mutt. She's not a tiny dog by any means, though. At the time, I felt very safe around her and would often take her for walks in a forest that was nearby. The day started off like any other. Me and my dad got in the car, drove around for a while, and arrived at the farm. I immediately got out and hugged Molly. My parents always got angry when I hugged her, since I'd smell like dog for the rest of the day. I put her leash on and asked my dad if I could take her for a walk real quick. He always thought we would just go down a road and back, but I always found it more interesting to take her out into the forest. I felt a certain kind of peace and relaxation there that was unmatched by anything else. We took a turn and headed out. As usual, when I got there, I'd take her leash off, so she could go explore the woods on her own. Most of the time, I'd carve my name into the trees or look for anything interesting nearby. I was playing baseball with some rocks and a wooden leg, presumably from an old table, when I heard it. Molly was barking at something. This wasn't unusual when we were out in the forest. I thought it was a fox, or perhaps some other animal. I quickly grabbed the wooden leg and held it like a weapon. I knew if it was a fox, I wouldn't have to attack it, but I felt a sense of security while I was holding it still. I called out, "Molly, Molly!" but she just kept on barking. This was very strange for me, since she always came right to me whenever I called her. I followed the sound of her barks and stumbled across a scene I'll never forget. There was a man in his late 50s or so, half naked and carrying a large machete in one hand. He was holding some moonshine in the other. This was the first time I'd ever stumbled across someone this far out into the woods, let alone someone half naked and carrying a big-ass machete. He was completely ignoring Molly, hacking away at the ground for some reason. I didn't really know how to handle the situation. Even now, I would have no idea how to handle this. Sir, are you okay?" I asked in confusion. I don't think I understood the seriousness of this situation at the time. The man turned around, revealing his face. He had some of the clearest blue eyes I've ever seen to this day. I could see them so well because they were open so wide. "Come here, boy. Look what I dug up." I was afraid that if I didn't listen to him, he would start chasing after me. That was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. I got a bit closer, but kept a good distance between us. I didn't see anything except for an empty hole. He returned to hitting the ground with his machete, occasionally taking sips from the bottle. I used this window of time to grab my dog and start walking away slowly, as to not notify him I was leaving. I took one final glance at the man. His head was dug deep in the hole. I was intrigued, so I kept on looking. I know, stupid of me. He finally retrieved his head from the ground. I was shocked when I saw him carrying a bone in his mouth. I have no idea what animal it belonged to, or even if it did belong to one. I had seen enough now. I started sprinting with my dog. As we ran, I heard him laughing. and then I saw something flying at me from the corner of my eye. It was that damn machete. It barely missed me. I heard him call out in frustration, "God damn it!" This made me run even faster. I knew the forest very well, so I wasn't afraid of getting lost. I ripped through branches and bushes until I arrived out of that forest. I didn't stop sprinting until I got to the garage, where my father was testing out lights on our tractor. I didn't tell him a single thing about the man, since I was afraid he'd get angry and wouldn't allow me to walk Molly anymore. Needless to say, though, I never went out to that forest alone again anyway.